You're listening to the Station 71 podcast with your hosts, Mario,
Beth,
Brian,
and Kirsten.
So this week we are going to be taking a look at some of Disney's abandoned projects, go over some news stories, and we'll see where that takes us. So let's dive into the news as always. Stitch's Great Escape is supposed to be closing for good on January 6, 2018. Anybody that's kind of been following along with Stitch's Great Escape knows that it's been down as like a character meet and greet location. They've been using the front of the queue as an area to meet Stitch, and it's been operating seasonally, but supposedly we got the news a couple hours ago that January 6th is its date, that it'll be gone for good. No word has come out officially on what's going to be in its place. Does anyone have any feelings about that one?
I mean, pretty much anything they put there is going to be better, in my opinion. So.
Yeah. I can't believe it's taking this long.
See, the only reason I think that it's taken forever to close is because that space is so limited. Like...
Yeah, and it's been like summer, so they haven't really, I guess, probably wanted to deal with more people than they have to.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I'm like the one person in the world that doesn't hate Stitch's Great Escape like everyone else. It's not a good ride, but...
whatever. I think it does get more flack than it deserves, but it's not very good.
Oh yeah, no, I'll totally say it's not good at all. So after that, we had the Muppets Fountain is going to be returning to the Grand Avenue area. Another thing that's been out for a while that some of us thought we weren't going to get back. I know Brian and I are kind of excited about this because, you know, Muppets. But it was filled in with like dirt and planters for a while. So it's nice that it should be returning fairly soon.
I think it will bring a nice little touch back to Muppets Courtyard. I didn't understand why it was filled to begin with, and it looked very forced.
Didn't they say it had something to do with like the piping for Toy Story Land or Star Wars Land?
I didn't hear that, but at least that would make sense, because without that, it just makes me feel like they're getting so, like, take you for every dollar you're worth, but then they do stuff like that seems like it has no point. Like, why spend the money to fill it in and then unfill it? So hopefully there was a reason.
What I vaguely remember hearing, and I don't know how true this is, it was something to do with how the pipe was laid out in that area, and them doing demolition would actually, like, hit a pipeline or something, and that's what they were worried about. They ended up shutting the water down through those pipes and ultimately shutting the Muppets Fountain off. But again, I honestly don't know how true that is. But welcome back if it is actually coming back. After that, we had Coco tops 400 million at worldwide box office, which is pretty big. Disney made the announcement on Wednesday that it still has a third of the international market to launch. In Australia, it's not out yet. Italy, it's not out yet. Brazil, Korea, the UK, and Japan. So for them to make that much money and it's still not out worldwide yet, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. It's such a good movie that I'm glad that people are giving it the credit it deserves.
I still have yet to see it.
Yeah, me too.
I would highly recommend Movie Pass. Although you can only see the same movie once on it, you still get to see it.
Yeah, I thought about getting that.
Yeah, I love it.
Like $10 a month pass thing, right?
Yeah, and they were doing a special recently where it was like $80 or $90 for a year.
No, that's not bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was like, I'd definitely spend that much on movie tickets in a year. More than that, but anyway, this is not an advertisement for Movie Pass.
Do you want to take over that next one, Beth? since you kind of read a little bit more than I did on that one.
Sure. So this came out a couple of days ago that Flights of Wonder in Animal Kingdom is going to be replaced with a different bird show based on Up, and it's going to have Russell and Doug exploring the wilderness and discovering different kinds of birds. So, well, from what I can read, it's going to be kind of a similar show to what it is now, and Kirsten was saying that it's going to be the same birds as well. But I think it'll be a nice, fresh take on the show, because it's been like that for a while. I love that show, but it'll be nice to see something new.
I honestly don't think I've ever seen Flights of Wonder.
Really?
Oh my god, I love it.
It is. It's a very cool show.
I mean, I've walked by it. I know that I've walked by it, because every time I walk by it, I hear it. I'm like, oh, I should stop for that. But I feel like I never have.
Yeah, I haven't
Right.
seen it since my first trip.
I try to see it as often as I can. I've gotten to the point where there's this part in it where they ask for an adult volunteer, and you have to have like a $1 bill. And I always have a $1 bill ready, and then like as soon as they say it, I just stand up, and they're like, okay. And then you get like a bird will like land on your arm for a second, and it's really cool.
That's
Yeah.
pretty neat. I guess I'll have to make it a point to see the new show, because I don't think I'll be there when it closes.
Yeah, hopefully they'll keep the interactivity, because I think they do a couple of segments that have like audience participation. But yeah, it's a really cool little show.
It sounds like it. So are we ready to dive into the topic this week?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Okay, so this week we're going to be talking about some of Disney's projects that they've kind of let sit unattended, abandoned, and kind of wear down. The two big ones we'll probably be talking about are River Country and Discovery Island. I know Brian's done a lot of prep work for this, so I'm going to actually turn this all over to you. You can have the show from here.
It's gonna be the Brian show.
Yes.
Well, this is a topic that's always been really interesting to me, especially because it goes against a lot of what Disney usually does in these situations, which if you're ever in any of the parks or any of the areas surrounding Disney, if there's construction going on or anything that they are trying to cover up, they generally do a very good job of it. I mean, anytime there's construction in the park, there's usually, covers and fences up to block sight lines from all the guests, and they put a lot of work into, keeping the theming there and, not destroying the illusion that you're in a different world. So these two areas, River Country and Discovery Island, always had this kind of aura of mystery around them, because Disney basically let them sit in a state of decay for a very long time, and not very far out of the eyes of guests. So it was always kind of, an interesting, mysterious thing to me, and anyways, prompted me to do a bit of research on this. But first off, I just want to ask y'all, have any of y'all been to either River Country or Discovery Island?
No, they were both closed before my first trip.
Yeah,
Nope.
me too.
So I have some faint memories of being a kid and being and going to Discovery Island, but River Country I remember pretty well. I've said this on here before. Growing up, my family generally stayed at Fort Wilderness Campground, and almost every year that we went, a part of that was going to River Country too, since it was right there. So River Country especially has been intriguing for me since the abandonment of it, because I actually have memories of being there and seeing it when it was in its prime. So it's very strange to me what Disney has let happen to this. But I think to kind of understand what happened with it and why it's where it's at now, you kind of have to look back a little bit through the history of it. And so I wrote up a little kind of short synopsis of the history of River Country and basically what happened to it. So I can dive into that. So River Country opened in 1976, and as I've said before, and as most of you probably know, it's located basically in the back of Fort Wilderness Campground. It was Disney's first water park, and it was considered by most to be the first truly themed water park to really open up. There were plenty of other, water parks where it was mainly just a mixture of rides and slides set up, but this was the first time that a company had really taken a theming and run with it and made it cohesive throughout the whole park. So the reason why this water park was even made was during the 70s, Disney was really trying to push Disney World to not just be this theme park that people came to for the day, or that only locals really came to and then left. They were really trying to push it to be more of an attraction and a resort that people came and stayed multiple days at. And during this time, this was also before a lot of on-property hotels were built, so you mainly had the 3 monorail resorts, and then you had Fort Wilderness Campground, which was seen as the cheaper answer to the expensive monorail loop hotels. So in that effort, Disney decided that they would try to expand some of the attractions around Fort Wilderness. So during this, they built Pioneer Hall. This is when the Hoop-Dee-Doo Revue was added. And this is also when River Country was opened. So when the park was opened in 1976, it drew a lot of inspiration from Mark Twain literature and was meant to be this rural swimming hole. And what the Imagineers were really shooting for was for a water park that flowed seamlessly, quite literally, into Bay Lake and the surrounding area to reinforce the theme. So a really important thing to understand about River Country was actually how the system of it worked. So the Imagineers made it so that guests were actually swimming in the water of Bay Lake. It was not completely unprocessed though. They had a system where water was pulled from Bay Lake. It ran through a filtration system. It was pumped up and held actually within an artificial mountain, and then pumped out down the multiple water slides that they had at the park. And that is what actually made the circulation of the water go through the park. The largest lake area within the park was called Bay Cove. It was a large swimming area, and it also acted as a catch pool for multiple water slides. And the Imagineers actually set it up with a what they called a rubber bladder that's divided Bay Cove from Bay Lake. And Bay Cove actually sat 6 inches higher than Bay Lake, which allowed water to spill out from River Country into Bay Lake, but it did not allow the unfiltered, quote-unquote, dirty water to come into the water park.
That's such a weird, it's so cool that they came up with an idea to do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also feel like that didn't really help them in the end.
Right, and as we'll see later, that was a at least partial reasoning for the closure and what really happened with River Country. And that's why I decided to mention it in this section. But anyways, once River Country was opened, it was very successful, at least in its first couple of years of operation. It was fairly small, and it was built on a 6-acre plot of land, which, to give you a comparison, Typhoon Lagoon is 56 acres and Blizzard Beach is 66 acres. So, yeah, the two large water parks at Disney very much so dwarf what River Country was at the time. But so even during, the mid-70s when this opened, before Disney really had, the attendance numbers that we see today, and this was before, the other parks was open. This was still back when it was just Magic Kingdom. Frequently, River Country had to close its doors to people because it reached capacity so quickly. So, and it had a fairly low capacity compared to the parks today. It only allowed 5,000 guests in at a time, which may seem a lot within a 6-acre area, but it quickly became too much for lifeguards to watch that many people.
In your research, did you find any articles about when it first opened, like the opening day, and the executives having to walk there?
No, I mean, I did see a lot of the people, like, I know they said, you know, who was the president at the time? Was that Nixon? That, like, his daughter was there.
Yeah, I read some article a long time ago, and I can't find it anywhere. I don't know if it was in a book or online, but it was so interesting about River Country, and I've, like, never found it again.
Yeah, no, I didn't see anything about that. I did see a cool thing though, that when like I want to say the couple weeks leading up to it, that they basically had like cast member parties there for basically testing of all the slides. For a couple weeks, like, cast members were allowed to come in and test the slides and everything, and that's kind of, you know, how they did a lot of the initial, like, it was the soft opening but not for guests, which that would be pretty sweet.
I would have, like, this is one of those things that I have no recollection of, so it's one of those things that I've always kind of been curious on, just because I know I never saw it. So it's always been really fascinating to kind of, like, see the state that this is in and see what it used to be.
Yeah, it was basically Tom Sawyer Island, but you got to go swimming there. Like, it really was. And I mean, obviously, you know, like I said, the Imagineers try to draw a lot on Mark Twain's literature in the creation of this, and, you know, but really even the a lot of the stuff, like, it had a barrel bridge just like Tom Sawyer Island had, and just, you know, it's hard to explain without really being there, but it really did. They did a great job theming this, and it really felt like you were just, you know, like, out in the country somewhere in a swimming hole. And they had a lot of attractions that if you look at nowadays, you would probably look back and say, oh wow, that seems really unsafe. And, like, by today's standards, it probably would be. So, like, for example, they had like like an inner tube ride where you went down a river, and, you know, it was like supposed to be like you were going down rapids, and it was, you know, pretty quick flowing water and, you know, shallow and everything, and I let multiple people go down it at a time. So if you ever watch the videos of people doing it, you know, there's just like a pile up of people sometimes trying to flow down this thing. And they had like multiple drop off water slides where, you know, you go down a short little slide, and then there's like I think it's like a 7-foot drop into the pool. But one of the biggest things that people had an issue with it was that a lot of the catch pools were fairly deep, and they had flowing water, and it created currents that made it really tough for people that weren't, like, very strong swimmers to do. And when you have somewhere like Disney World, where you have a lot of people that are coming from, you know, possibly, you know, colder regions where people, you know, don't really grow up swimming, and they don't, you know, have the skills to really swim in currents and stuff, you know, it was dangerous for people. So a lot of people had concerns about that.
But that's kind of crazy, because, like, we were talking privately about Action Park, and it's just so funny to see things like this where, you know, by today's standards, that would be such a safety risk.
Right.
But, you know, no one really thought about those things.
Right. And just like obviously, you know, River Country was nowhere to the extreme that Action Park was, but kind of part of the draw to it was, you know, you weren't just getting in line and just going down a slide or anything. You know, you felt like you were there, you were exploring it, and then you were just, like, you know, going around jumping off rocks and stuff. And you know, a lot of the the attraction was in the theming, that it wasn't, you don't get in a queue to get on a ride or a slide. You were just exploring, jumping around, swimming, doing all this stuff. So the kind of, a lot of, there were some dangerous parts of it for sure, but I think a lot of it was the Imagineers trying to make it seem like you were, not boxed into...
Not in a park.
Exactly, right. They wanted it to feel like you were out exploring and doing this stuff. And so I think a lot of the truly dangerous elements of the park were kind of, in people's minds.
So just to clarify, River Country was strictly a water park. Like, you couldn't stay, the closest you could stay on property was Fort Wilderness, right?
Right.
And you could still kind of see it from Fort Wilderness, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Didn't they fill in one of the pools last year when they were starting on the DVC over there?
I remember that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I was going to touch on that a little bit later, but yeah, they actually, it was a big rumor going around in 2010 that the new DVC resort was going to be built over there in that area. Whether or not that's actually going to happen, it kind of people aren't really sure about. And yeah, last year in 2016, one of the main pools was completely filled with sand. But it looks like now that was just a way to eliminate a pretty large area of standing water when the Zika outbreak was happening. Because that area is fairly close to some of the stuff in Fort Wilderness, like where Mickey's Backyard Barbecue is and everything like that. So I think that was more of a way to prevent mosquito infestations as much as possible.
Well, that's nice of them.
Yeah. But anyway, so during its run, River Country was slightly different than some of the other water parks. Obviously, the fact that it had, it was using the natural water source from Bay Lake meant that the large majority of River Country did not have heated pools, which meant that during the off season, it closed. So usually from late September until early spring of the next year, it was down for maintenance and mainly just closed due to the lack of heated water. So from 76 until 2001, River Country opened and closed every year, and in 2001 again, River Country closed for its annual off season, but did not reopen in 2002, and this left a lot of people scratching their heads because Disney never made an announcement of a closure or really gave any idea that anything was amiss with River Country. So during 2002, Disney spokesperson said that it was possible that River Country would reopen that same year, but it was mainly going to depend on guest feedback and whether or not there was really a push for it to come. So throughout 2003, it looked like Disney was still somewhat maintaining River Country, but again, no openings. And then finally, in January of 2005, Disney finally announced that River Country was closed permanently. And they have never actually come out and given a formal reason for the park's closure, which is a big reason why there's this whole aura of mystery around it. But there's a lot of reasons that people have given over the years, some of them plausible, some of them are outright false, and some of them kind of have a little bit of in between. So hopefully this will kind of dispel some of the rumors about why it's closed and kind of make sense. But
I'm interested to hear what you have to say about that, because every time it gets brought up in an online space, it's always pure speculation as to why it closed. And there's so many different rumors out there.
right.
That I know that you did your research. I can't wait to hear what you have.
So much like anything of this with so much mystery surrounding it, there's not really one definitive answer, and it really came down to a lot of factors from what I can tell. One of the biggest things that people say was that there was a large safety concern with the park. And there were actually 2 deaths that occurred at River Country as a result of drowning. Both of them were teenagers, but the latest one happened in 1989. So a lot of people like to say that there were, it was so dangerous that that's why it's closed, but the latest death that occurred over a decade from when the park was actually closed. So a lot of people, it's hard to pin it on just a safety aspect, because Disney was aware that yes, there were some unsafe areas with it, but that clearly wasn't enough for them to close it down completely because of that. Probably the biggest mystery and thing that people throw out there when this comes up is the deadly amoeba that was found in River Country and actually caused the death of an 11-year-old at the park. So during the 1980s, there was somewhat of an outbreak of a deadly amoeba in freshwater in Florida. And so this was one of, I believe it was 4 deaths that occurred that year. And this was the only one that ever occurred at River Country. So again, a lot of people, when you ask them about River Country, they bring this up and they say that's why it closed. Someone died from that and they realized it wasn't safe anymore and they closed it down. But again, this occurred in 1980, 20 years from when the park closed. So obviously that death did not directly affect it.
Can I add on to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know where I started learning about that, but I've actually read about the amoeba. I have literally no idea how to pronounce it, but it's
got a very weird name.
Naegleria fowleri. But it's actually in like a lot of freshwater. It's in, like, if you've ever swam in a freshwater lake, chances are there's some of that in there. It's just really hard for people to get it because you have to like get water up your nose in just the right way. So it's just super uncommon. And whenever I lived in Little Rock, a girl actually contracted it and lived, which is really surprising because I remember hearing on the news of her being, at Children's there in Little Rock. But yeah, after I first learned about it, I was literally petrified to go to the lake for a long time because it's not uncommon, but it's just really hard to get. And I think there was more of it, the outbreak made it easier to get at that, whenever that happened. But yeah, it's not like River Country was some crazy like situation with their brain-eating, bacteria. It's other places.
And that's why that Disney was really pretty much absolved of responsibility for this death, because it was determined that this really could have happened in any freshwater lake that anyone swam in, and that really it was much less likely for it to occur at Disney because they did do filtration. And when you look at the sheer density of people that were packed into this amount of freshwater, if there was really a problem with it, that probably a lot more people would have been affected and they weren't. So while that is, most likely not the reason that it closed, one kind of side effect from that possibly played a role in it was that because of these amoeba outbreaks later, legislation was passed that was going to start requiring basically any water park in Florida to use water that was deemed potable. So a lot of people have speculated that this was going to cause Disney to have to revamp this very intricate filtration system that they had set up so they would still be able to use the water from Bay Lake, or it would cause them to have to completely revamp things and not use Bay Lake's water anymore, which at that point would kind of kill the whole theme behind River Country. So the amoeba attack probably did not cause the River Country closure, but some of the trickle-down effects could have played into it.
It didn't cause it, but it definitely didn't help.
Right. But so with that, we see that the major theme that I think is really the cause of, why River Country shut down, and it's really as simple as cost. Again, the closure of River Country happened in September of 2001, and right after the September 11th attack, Disney saw a huge decrease in attendance at its park in the following couple of years. So they were looking, they had to make a lot of cuts. I know that they made budget cuts, they cut employees during this time in order to become more profitable. And River Country was kind of just sitting there, and when if you're looking at the portfolio of all the stuff that Disney has to offer, River Country was just too easy to place on the chopping block. Again, going back to it, River Country only had a 5,000 capacity for guests, so it's really not bringing in the amount of people that they wanted it to. And again, as Disney's expanding during this time, we've just had the fourth gate open. They have definitely fully made the push into Disney World being a resort that you go and that you stay multiple days, multiple weeks at a time. And River Country just wasn't able, to hold that many people, and it wasn't big enough, and it wasn't really flashy enough to be drawing in those crowds. What started out is basically a way to pull people into Fort Wilderness. Now that there's a large number of other resorts for people to stay at on campus, it doesn't really make sense to try to keep pulling people into Fort Wilderness, especially with something that is not, large enough to, hold that many people.
So I have a question. I don't know if you found the answer to this, Brian, but I was trying to look it up while you were talking. Mm-hmm. I know there were a couple videos of people exploring, and obviously we don't condone that because that'll get you kicked off of Disney property.
Right.
But if you look up the videos of people walking around River Country, at least the ones from a couple years back, the music was still on.
Well,
that's so creepy.
I heard that was music from from Fort Wilderness, and that the lights were still on though.
Right. There's one that's in 2011, and it's very it's pretty obvious that the music is definitely coming from there. But I'll post that one in there too. But the lights were definitely on and stuff too. I can see that being for safety reasons. But did you find anything about that?
I didn't see anything about that specifically, but one of the weirdest things about River Country and then Discovery Island too, then when we get into it, is not only did Disney shut this down and obviously decide to go away from it, but they just left everything in there. So it wouldn't really surprise me if if the system and the speakers and everything to play music throughout the park were still there. Because if you go on Google Earth now and look at it, aside from very few things, I know one of them was the water tower that they repurposed at the Meadow swimming pool at Fort Wilderness. I mean, River Country is basically still there. The slides, obviously one of the pools has been filled in, but the area that was Bay Cove is still there. The barrel bridges, everything. It's still River Country for the most part. It's just completely non-operational and has been almost completely overtaken, by nature again.
It's so weird and so fascinating all at the same time.
It really is. And probably the strangest thing to me though is that I could understand that if River Country had been, in a completely separate area of the park that nobody is going to anymore, that Disney would say, okay, it's off in no man's land over there, we'll just let it go to waste. But basically the front area of River Country and even the entrance gate into River Country is still used. It is now the entrance to Mickey's Backyard Barbecue. So if you go in there for the barbecue, or the area is still open even not during the barbecue, guests can just walk by there. And the only thing that's separating the open area of Fort Wilderness from River Country is a fence, and which you can walk right up to and see through and get a pretty good glimpse of River Country there.
It's just so weird that they would just leave it.
Mm-hmm. And as someone that loves staying at Fort Wilderness, my favorite way to go to the Magic Kingdom is from Fort Wilderness to Magic Kingdom directly on one of the ferry boats. And strangely enough, ferry boat runs right by the area where Bay Lake, goes into where River Country was. And from there, you can still see it very clearly. So, I mean, every day there's, thousands of people on a boat going by River Country, and they can see directly in it. So it's very strange to me why Disney, one, has left it open and never really came out and said why they closed it.
Yeah, you'd think they would take some sort of, measure to try and mask it a little bit if they're literally just going to let it rot.
Right, especially when you see the effort that they, go through to do that almost anywhere else on property.
Mm-hmm. Now I want to take a ferry boat to Magic Kingdom so I can see it.
I will say it's not convenient at all if you're not staying at Fort Wilderness, but it's very cool. I know a lot of it is nostalgia for me because that's how I went to Magic Kingdom almost every time when I was a kid. But it's nice, it's relaxing, and you get to see kind of a lot of the unexplored kind of still natural areas of Bay Lake when you go that way. You get a lot of cool views of the contemporary and everything too. If I would say if you're not in a big hurry to go to Magic Kingdom and you're a big Disney fan, at least once in your life you should probably go to Fort Wilderness and take the ferry boat over there just because it's something different.
Yeah, I definitely want to.
So on that same note, as you're going on the boat towards Magic Kingdom, you can look out to your left and see the ruins of River Country, or you can look to your right and see the ruins of Discovery Island.
So real quick, I just want to take a moment before you go into that. Because you said I can see everything on Google Maps, naturally I'm looking it up on Google Maps. And Discovery Island is marked. Just want to throw that out. It actually has the words Discovery Island on it.
Mm-hmm.
But River Country, you can tell what it is. You can tell, that that's obviously the remains of River Country, but there's no indication that that's... if you didn't know any better, you wouldn't know that that's what this is.
That's interesting.
So I just thought it was strange that Discovery Island is marked.
Yeah.
On Google Maps is Discovery Island.
So, Discovery Island also opened in the 70s, much very similarly to River Country. And actually later on, Disney really tried to market River Country and Discovery Island kind of together, even though they had different theming. Their close proximity, Disney decided it would be a good idea to group them together, and you could buy double tickets basically to go to each I don't know what you want to call it, attraction individually. I'm sorry, on the same ticket. But what Discovery Island was originally planned to be was a pirate-themed island that was planned to actually be opened with the opening of Disney World in 1971. Fortunately, plans got kind of pushed back, and it never opened, at least not with the opening of Disney World. But after a couple years of operation, Disney was seeing some declining attendance, and they went back to this pirate theme idea to try to open up something to draw more guests in, much the same way that they did with River Country. So in 1973, Imagineers picked up the project again and decided that they were going to rebrand Blackbeard's Islands as Treasure Island, and it opened as a small island to be able to be explored, had a couple very small pirate themed attractions, but it was mainly a walkthrough type area, meant to be modeled after kind of like a deserted tropical island type deal. But after a couple years of operation, Disney saw that they weren't getting anywhere near the attendance numbers that they wanted. So in 1976, they closed it down. So this is when what was Treasure Island had a major overhaul. Disney actually brought in huge amounts of dirt and boulders and sand and actually expanded the island to 11.5 acres. So it was a pretty massive construction effort for Disney to do this, and they had pretty big plans for this. So when it reopened, it was now themed as Discovery Island as it was when it closed. But it was mainly set up to be a bird sanctuary. So Disney brought in a large number of tropical birds and kept the same kind of like walking trail style that had been seen on Treasure Island. But now there was a large amount of wildlife, and it operated mainly this way throughout its entirety of its existence.
I was interested when I was reading to realize, when they brought in all of the dirt and stuff, and they actually spent a lot of, well, they must have, money bringing like wildlife or flora and fauna from like China and, all over the world. It wasn't just like, here's an island, let's plant some trees. I don't know. Like they really spent, money on theming it, which I didn't realize, I thought it was just kind of like one of the things from when Disney first started and it wasn't a huge deal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also I was reading that, of course, Animal Kingdom is as well, but this park was accredited by the AZA, which is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which is like, the main accreditation source for any like animal-based places. Like you have to, pay your dues and have specific, like very specific requirements, like as far as your habitats and your enrichment and feeding. So it's like, they really didn't, do this lightly. They went all in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, going off that, did anybody else see the thing about the birds and like the dusty sparrow? It was like the last I think it's called Dusty Sparrow in the world lived there, and it died in 1987, and then the species was declared extinct in 1990.
Oh wow!
Wow.
Yeah, that's depressing.
Back to what you were talking about, Beth, with it being an AZA accredited zoological sanctuary. It ran into some issues actually in the mid-90s, kind of because of that. Apparently Discovery Island started running into issues with vultures and other predatory birds coming onto the island naturally, and apparently whether from upper management or employees taking matters into their own hands, there was reports of some of the cast members attacking some of the predatory birds to keep them off the island.
Gosh.
No.
Yes. So Disney received a good bit of flack and actually a couple of lawsuits with that, which they were actually able to maintain their ACA accreditation throughout the whole thing, but they did run into a little bit of backlash from, obviously people wanting this nature preserve to kind of not be attacking natural animals. So
Makes sense.
but that did not seem to be a major cause of the attraction's closure. Unlike River Country, Discovery Island has a pretty clear reason for why it shut down, and it's simply that Animal Kingdom was built off of the same principles to what Discovery Island meant to be, but on a much grander scale.
Well, kind of off of that before you go any further, the other thing that, like, the one thing that I really know about Discovery Island was that it was just super inconvenient to get to.
Extremely.
So it just makes sense for them to open a park on land that's got the same premise, and it's just easier for them to fill.
Especially with what, people consider Discovery Island to be a half-day attraction, if that much. So to take the time out of your day to drive, to a dock, to get on a boat, to go to the island, and then have to do all that back again if you plan to go anywhere else at Disney was extremely inconvenient and really, really did not fit in, with Disney's idea of making Disney World a convenient, like, all-in-one-go place where you could easily go from one park to the other, or one attraction or one area to the other. It was just extremely inconvenient. So with Animal Kingdom's opening in 1998, a lot of people kind of started seeing the end of that, and from its opening, many of the animals were starting to be moved out of Discovery Island and into Disney's Animal Kingdom. And then finally, in 1999, Disney announced that Discovery Island was going to be closed, and April 8th was its final day of operation. It operated just under maintenance for a couple more months, and after that was, for the most part, completely abandoned by Disney. So no real official imagery or anything has been seen from Disney. Quite obviously, they don't want this area to be, to be seen by most people, especially after it's been, allowed to be overgrown. And from what my research has shown, there has only been 3 documented cases of any non-Disney representative or Disney employee being on the island. There were 2 different urban explorers that somehow snuck onto the island in 2005 and 2007, one of which I heard, and I'm not sure if this is true, but he actually swam across Bay Lake, basically from Fort Wilderness to the island, which there is absolutely no way I would even consider that.
It was Shane Perez. Yeah, he is now banned from Disney property for life because of that. I read that they would have pressed charges, but his blog about it didn't get popular until 4 years, or after 4 years later, which is the statute of limitations. But yeah, he says now that he didn't realize, the danger of like alligators and that sort of thing. He had planned on taking a boat over, like an inflatable raft, but it was just too obvious, and like with security boats coming by relatively often, which I didn't realize that they went by, side note, but that it would have been too obvious, so swimming was like the best option. It was him and 2 other guys. Yeah. Not
This
smart.
sounds like
Such a far swim, though.
It's not. It's actually only, when I was reading, he said that he thought it was only like 100 feet, from the shore over by Fort Wilderness. It was actually about 300 feet, which I've never measured how far I can swim. It doesn't seem like that far, but, I mean, it'd be a long way with an alligator chasing you, which is what would be my worry, but...
Very true.
But yeah, so his, let me see, was his the one that occurred in 2005, or was his the 2007 one? Do y'all know?
Yeah, I think his was the one in 2005, and then he published the blog post in 2009 specifically because of the statute of limitations. But yeah, I remember reading about this a while back and being absolutely fascinated because the pictures are absolutely amazing.
Mm-hmm. Some of this,
which we'll have to post a link in the show notes.
Yeah, I mean, just some of the stuff that was left behind. Again, it was very similar to River Country. Like, it looks like, something out of some post-apocalyptic film. Like, stuff was just left there. Like, I remember, I think one of the things either him or one of the other explorers found was, there was still, like, refrigerators filled with medication for all the animals that had just been left behind. You know, there was like office supplies. They showed whiteboards that still had writing on it from, you know, the cast members that were working there at the time. That, I mean, it really looks like people just packed up and left, and just everything is still there.
They even had like pictures, like physical pictures that people had just left behind.
Yeah, it just seems so disingenuous from what we know about Disney, you know, and how they act about that stuff now. It's just so weird to imagine, like, how that occurred. I just wish that I had been there, like, when the last boat or whatever left, and, like, did they know they weren't coming back for the rest of that stuff, or did somebody just slack off? Like, I don't know. It's just, I wish that we knew what had happened.
Well, and kind of like what Brian was saying earlier, this is so not Disney.
Right.
It's just so mind-boggling that they just let both of these parks just sit.
And yeah, and as far as I know, there were the two explorations, the one in 2005, the one in 2007, and then there was no other documented video, pictures, or anything from Discovery Island until earlier this year, actually, when another group of urban explorers snuck onto the island. And if you get a chance, go check out this video too, because it's really cool. It's like an hour long, but there's a couple other videos kind of like, you know, showing the highlights of it and everything. But they went during the day and got a lot of really, really good video of some of the stuff. And it's amazing. Like, obviously, you know, everything is very overgrown, but it's pretty incredible, like, how much is still left standing there.
Did they say how they got there, or?
I do not know specifically with them. I think they took a boat, which is very, like, you can rent a boat, as I'm sure a lot of you know, to just drive around Bay Lake. So it seems like it wouldn't be too difficult to really get on the island. Now, getting on the island without getting caught eventually, yeah, it's probably pretty difficult. But I feel like anyone, if they're not under the fear of getting a lifetime ban from Disney, could just rent a boat, drive over there, and hop off, and, you know, maybe get an hour or two before security found them and went on the island and got them.
Yeah, you would have to time it so perfectly because of, like, the ferries driving by and stuff. And apparently that guy, I don't know his name, he's gotten into a lot of places. He's gotten in there, he's gotten into River Country, he's gotten into Wonders of Life, basically everywhere. You know, that's kind of mysterious Disney.
It's just so crazy.
Yeah, the whole concept of urban exploration is so fascinating to me. I just don't have the courage and don't want to get banned.
Exactly. Like, I would love to go check out either one of these places. Probably Discovery Island more so than River Country, just because of, like, it has seriously, like, just become reclaimed by nature to the point that it's basically a natural island now. You know, a lot of wild birds and everything have come back to it. But yeah, there's no way I would risk it for the ban.
Yeah, exactly.
As a side note, unrelated to necessarily urban exploration, have you guys ever read The Dark Side of Disney?
No.
I've seen that, but I haven't ever read it.
Okay, so it's a really short book, but it's really interesting. I'm pretty sure it's a pseudonym, but the author is Leonard Kinsey, and it's basically him talking about growing up in Central Florida and him and his friends going to Disney so much that they, you know, as teenagers, they kind of started getting bored and trying to figure out ways to make it interesting. So they even go as far as to, like, and this was a really long time ago, like I want to say back in the 80s, before, like, the internet was really even popular. So they even went as far as to find an ASCII map of the utilidors.
Wow.
And figure out where the entrances were. And they, like, conform to the Disney look. Like, they shaved their beards and wore, like, plain clothing and everything, and just went into the utilidors, and everyone just acted like nobody cared that they were there at all. I'm sure that's way different than it would be today, but it's a really interesting read if you guys are interested in urban exploration. You know, like I said, it's not really the same, but it's on a kind of similar vein.
Sounds really cool.
So is there anything else that you found about these two places that were particularly interesting, or?
Well, I mean, like I said, what's so interesting to me is that, you know, you can take that ferry boat ride and get so close to both of them that Disney's doing such a, you know, they're putting such little effort into covering up these areas that they've just let go to waste. You know, so I would like to see probably something replace the area now where River Country is. I don't know if, you know, anything would ever come back to Discovery Island, you know, because like you were saying, one of the biggest reasons that it closed was just how much of a pain it was to get to it, and it's not really in close proximity to anything other than Fort Wilderness. So I don't really see Discovery Island reopening. Maybe something at River Country, but who knows?
So that poses an interesting question that we can kind of talk about now. If you would think that they would put anything where River Country is now, what do you think it would be? My money is probably on more DVC, because I think that was the rumor that was going around when they started filling in the pool.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes sense, I think. I don't think they would be able to open another park in that area.
Yeah, it's just too small of an area right now. You know, they've showed that if it's not going to be a big, you know, people eater, that, you know, they're not really going to work on keeping something at Disney, and they're definitely not going to build anything that's not going to eat a large amount of people. So it's only 6 acres to work with. You're probably right. Some type of DVC resort would probably be the best use of that space.
I mean, honestly, I don't know if they could make a bridge all the way to Discovery Island, like how, if they could do pylons or how deep the water is. But I feel like if they could definitely put more overwater bungalows out there and make a crap load of money off people. Like, people would love that, because one, you're in an overwater bungalow, and two, it's like super private, super like upscale. You know, I feel like they would definitely make money if they did that. Well, not that I want that or not, but you know.
There were actually talks after Discovery Island closed that it was going to be built as a like a newlywed getaway for people that had gotten married at Disney, and they were going to, you know, build up something similar to that where it was like secluded and everything, but obviously nothing ever came of that. But that would have been a pretty neat thing, I think.
It would have been interesting to see how they pull that off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or just like not necessarily a honeymoon resort, but like a adult only resort in general. You know, not only because I think that would be awesome as someone who doesn't have kids, but also because being on an island, I don't think would necessarily be the safest option for children.
I mean, I have kids, and I would go to an adult only resort.
So make Pleasure Island a legit island and bring it back.
Yes. That would be amazing.
A good idea.
All right, Disney, take it and run with it.
If only, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you guys want to talk about with these two? I think Brian kind of did a really good job on summing all of that up for us.
Yeah, lots of research.
This was very easy to do for me just because of how interesting I thought it was. So,
This is a really interesting topic, especially because, you know, we've said it a couple times. Disney's notorious for like that pristine image, and two things that Disney has done that didn't really work out the way they wanted them to are just sitting in plain sight to rot for anyone to see.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's about gonna sum it up this week then.
Yeah, and you know, like I said, this was a pretty brief overview, of the history and everything that went on behind these two areas. But, if this is intriguing to you, go on YouTube, check out some of the videos of people that have snuck into these places, and definitely do some more digging on the history behind either one of the areas, because I think both of them are just extremely interesting and very mysterious parts of Disney. So very
and
cool
definitely
thing.
Don't go there yourself.
Definitely
We're
don't.
Not encouraging that.
There's plenty of videos online to check out with other people who have taken the risk, so use those resources.
Yeah, we were talking about doing this, and I started looking into stuff. Like, I really was trying to research and everything, but I was coming across more YouTube videos and things like that, and that was just really fascinating to see the state that it's in now, so definitely take a look at it. So, anything else you guys want to talk about before we tie this up?
Oh, news item. If this isn't out until Saturday, that means Star Wars came out last night. Yay!
Yay.
So, I'm sure it's killing at the box office.
Are any of you guys going to see it right away?
Sunday.
I'm shooting for Saturday night, hopefully. I will keep all
I didn't
spoilers.
realize it was so soon. I feel like this month has just flown by in general, but
Christmas will do that to you. So that's going to do it for us today, guys. Thanks for joining us again on another episode of the Station 71 podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes and leave us an iTunes review as well. We'll get to reading them on air when we get some of those. If you want to get in touch with us, you can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Station71pod, or on Twitter at Station71pod, Instagram at Station71podcast, and you can send us any listener questions or anything you want us to talk about to Station71podcast@gmail.com. We hope you enjoyed your ride, and we'll see you real soon.